What if the Great Wall of China failed? Mongol invasions explained. Calm history for sleep. Before we begin tonight's journey, if you find yourself drifting peacefully through these stories, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue bringing you these calm explorations of history. Now settle in, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin. Picture this: dawn breaking across northern China. The year is somewhere in the 13th century, though the exact date matters little in this moment. Mist rises from valleys between ancient mountains, curling like silk scarves in the cold morning air. Along a ridge that stretches as far as the eye can see, a wall stands silent. Stone upon stone, earth packed tight between brick faces, watchtowers rising at intervals like sentinels keeping vigil over an empire. The guards stationed here have been awake since before first light. They wear thick padded jackets against the autumn chill, their breath visible in small clouds. One man scans the northern horizon, where the grasslands begin their endless roll toward Mongolia. Another tends a small fire, ready to light the beacon if needed. The morning is quiet. The wall stands as it has for generations, a boundary between two worlds. This is the Great Wall of China at peace. But imagine for a moment a different morning. Imagine the same mist, the same cold air, but the wall absent. Or perhaps present but ineffective. What if this immense barrier, built stone by stone across centuries, had not stood in the way of history's greatest cavalry force? What if the Mongol horsemen, those masters of the steppe, had found China's door wide open? Tonight we explore that possibility, not through violence or drama, but through calm observation of what was, what might have been, and what the meeting of these two worlds truly meant. We'll walk along the wall itself, understanding why it existed. We'll ride briefly with the Mongols, seeing the world from horseback. And we'll imagine peacefully what a world without this barrier might have looked like. Let the day's concerns fade. Let your breathing slow. We have a long, gentle journey ahead. The Great Wall of China was not built in a single moment by a single dynasty. This is perhaps the first thing to understand as we walk along its length in our minds. If you could see the wall from above, stretching across mountains and valleys, you would notice something curious. It is not one wall, but many walls, built and rebuilt across more than 2,000 years. The story begins far back in time, during a period called the Warring States, around the 7th century before the Common Era. China was not yet China as we know it. Instead, the land was divided into competing kingdoms, each with its own ruler, its own army, its own ambitions. These states built walls along their borders, not to keep out foreigners but to keep out each other. The state of Chu built walls to defend against the state of Qi. The state of Zhao erected barriers against invasions from the north. These early walls were simpler than what would come later. They were made primarily of rammed earth, layer upon layer of soil packed so tightly it became nearly as hard as stone. Workers carried baskets of dirt, poured it between wooden frames, and pounded it with heavy tampers until the wall rose, section by section, toward the sky. Imagine the work. Imagine the patience. One basket of earth, then another, then another. Day after day, season after season. The walls grew slowly, deliberately, as all lasting things must. Then came Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. In 221 BCE, after years of warfare, he brought the competing states under single rule. His vision was grand: connect the existing walls, extend them, create a continuous barrier along China's northern frontier. This would become the first true Great Wall, stretching over 5,000 kilometers. The emperor ordered General Meng Tian to oversee the project. Historical records suggest that between 300,000 and 500,000 soldiers worked on the wall, aided by hundreds of thousands of laborers, conscripted from across the empire. They worked in conditions that tested human endurance. In the mountains they quarried stone and hauled it up steep slopes. In the plains they continued the tradition of rammed earth construction. The wall needed to rise quickly and earth was plentiful. Many workers died during construction. Some estimates suggest hundreds of thousands perished from exhaustion, accidents, or harsh conditions. There is a legend, passed down through centuries, of a woman named Meng Jiangnu whose husband died building the wall. Her tears, the story goes, were so powerful they caused a section of the wall to collapse, revealing her husband's bones. Whether true or not, the legend speaks to the human cost measured in lives given, families separated, and bodies that never returned home. But the Qin Wall was only the beginning. Dynasties rose and fell, each with its own relationship to the northern frontier. The Han Dynasty, which ruled from 206 BCE to 220 CE, extended the wall further west, protecting the Silk Road trade routes. Their Great Wall became the longest in history at that point, stretching more than 8,000 kilometers. They built beyond the grasslands into the deserts, where conditions were even more unforgiving. Watchtowers stood lonely against vast skies, their fires the only light for miles. Not every dynasty embraced the wall. The Tang Dynasty, confident in its military strength and diplomatic skills, largely abandoned wall building. The Song Dynasty, pushed south by northern invaders, lost control of the northern territories where the ancient walls stood. The wall fell into disrepair, its stones scavenged, its earthen sections eroded by wind and rain. Then came the Ming Dynasty from 1368 to 1644 CE, and with them the Great Wall we recognize today. The Ming faced constant pressure from Mongol tribes to the north. These Mongols, though no longer unified under a single empire as in Genghis Khan's time, still posed a significant threat through frequent raids. The Ming responded with the most ambitious wall-building program in history. For nearly 300 years the Ming built and rebuilt. They faced the wall with brick and stone, making it wider, taller, more permanent. They constructed elaborate watchtowers every few hundred meters, with rooms for soldiers, storage for weapons and supplies, and beacon towers for signaling. The wall averaged 7 to 8 meters in height, with some sections rising to 15 meters. It was wide enough on top for horses and soldiers to move quickly along its length. The Ming Wall was not just a barrier. It was a military highway, a communication system, a statement of imperial will carved in stone across the landscape. Garrison stations housed thousands of troops. Signal systems could relay messages across hundreds of kilometers in mere hours. Smoke during the day, fire at night. One column of smoke meant about 100 enemy soldiers spotted. 2 columns, 500. 4 columns, over 1,000. 5 columns, over 5,000. The signals passed from tower to tower, alerting distant commanders to threats before the enemy could reach populated areas. And yet, for all this construction, all this effort, all these lives and resources poured into stone and earth, we must ask a simple question. Did it work? The answer, as with most questions about history, is neither simple nor absolute. Let us rest here for a moment in our journey. Picture yourself standing on a section of the Great Wall as it exists today, perhaps at Badaling or Mushianyu, the most visited sections near Beijing. The wall curves along mountain ridges, its stones weathered but still strong. Tourists walk its length, taking photographs, marveling at the engineering. But in your mind, strip away the modern world. Remove the tourists, the restaurants, the cable cars. Go back to a cold night in the 15th century. You are a soldier stationed at a watchtower. Your shift begins at sunset. You climb the stone stairs, your hand touching walls that still hold the day's warmth. At the top, the wind hits you, cold and persistent. You are not alone, but your companions are quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. One tends the brazier, keeping flames ready to light the signal fire if needed. Another watches the darkness, looking for movement, for anything unusual. The northern grasslands are invisible in the night, but you know they are there, stretching endlessly toward Mongolia. This is what the wall truly was. A place where men stood watch, night after night, year after year, generation after generation. Some saw attacks. Most saw nothing but grass and sky. Yet they stood watch anyway because the wall demanded it. Their lives were hard. Archaeological evidence and historical records paint a clear picture. Soldiers stationed along the wall received modest pay, often in grain rather than coin. They lived in small rooms within the watchtowers or in garrison buildings nearby. In winter, temperatures could drop far below freezing. In summer, the sun beat down relentlessly on stone and earth. Food was basic: millet, rice if lucky, vegetables when available. Meat was rare. Letters and documents preserved from the Ming Dynasty show us their concerns. They worried about supplies running low. They complained about corrupt officers who stole their rations. They wrote of loneliness, of missing their families, of the endless monotony broken only by occasional terror when raiders did appear. Some deserted, though the punishment for desertion was severe. Others served their entire terms and returned home, if they survived, to families that had aged in their absence. Yet despite these hardships, the wall functioned. Not perfectly, not always, but often enough. When maintained, when properly garrisoned, when soldiers remained disciplined and alert, the wall slowed invasions. It did not stop them entirely. That was never truly possible. But it channeled them, forced them toward fortified passes where defenders waited in strength. It bought time for armies to mobilize, for civilians to flee, for emperors to make decisions. A well-documented example comes from 1428, during the Ming Dynasty. A Chinese general used the wall strategically, luring Mongol forces toward a fortified section. With the wall at their backs and Chinese troops in front, the Mongols found themselves trapped, unable to maneuver. The battle ended in Chinese victory not because the wall itself fought, but because it shaped the battlefield, limiting options, creating choke points. The wall also served non-military purposes. It regulated trade, controlling who could enter and leave China. Merchants traveling the Silk Road had to pass through specific gates, where officials collected taxes and inspected goods. The wall helped generate revenue for the empire, transforming a military structure into an economic one. But the wall had limits. It could be bypassed. It could be breached. And most famously, in the cases of the Mongol conquests of the 13th century and the Manchu invasion that ended the Ming Dynasty in 1644, it failed to prevent the fall of Chinese dynasties to northern powers. How did the Mongols, in particular, overcome this seemingly insurmountable obstacle? The answer lies not in the wall's weakness, but in the nature of Mongol warfare, Mongol strategy, and perhaps most importantly, Chinese internal division. Let us ride north now, across the grasslands, and meet the people who would change the world. The Mongolian steppe is a different kind of vastness than mountain ranges or oceans. It is emptiness that feels full, silence that speaks, distances that reshape your sense of scale. Grass extends to every horizon, rippling in wind like the surface of a great green sea. The sky is enormous, unbroken by mountains or trees, so large it seems to curve down at the edges to meet the earth. This is where the Mongols lived. This is what shaped them. They were nomadic people, meaning they did not build cities or plant crops that rooted them to one place. Instead, they moved with the seasons, following grass and water for their herds. Sheep, goats, cattle, yaks, and most importantly, horses. The Mongols' entire civilization revolved around animals, particularly horses. Children learned to ride before they could walk steadily. By age 5, a Mongol child could ride competently. By 10 they could ride all day without tiring. Horses meant mobility. Mobility meant freedom. Freedom meant survival. When pastures in one area were depleted, the tribe moved to fresh grass. When enemies threatened, they could scatter across the steppe, impossible to pin down. When opportunities arose, they could gather quickly and strike before opponents could react. Their homes were jairs, known in the West as yurts. These were circular tents with lattice frames covered in felt made from sheep's wool. A ger could be assembled in less than an hour and disassembled in minutes. Everything a family owned could be packed onto carts pulled by oxen or yaks. The entire society was designed for movement. But do not mistake nomadic life for primitive life. The Mongols developed sophisticated skills perfectly adapted to their environment. They were master horsemen, able to shoot arrows accurately while riding at full gallop. They could ride for days with minimal rest, sleeping in the saddle, eating dried meat and cheese that needed no cooking. They navigated by stars and landmarks, crossing hundreds of kilometers without maps. Their political structure was tribal, based on kinship and loyalty. Clans formed the basic unit, led by chieftains. Multiple clans could unite into tribes under a khan or leader. These alliances were fluid, forming and dissolving based on strength, need, and benefit. Loyalty was personal, earned through leadership rather than inherited automatically. Then came Temujin, born around 1162 CE. His early life was hard even by steppe standards. When Temujin was 9 years old, his father, a minor chieftain, was poisoned by rival tribesmen. The family was abandoned by their clan, left to starve on the harsh grasslands. Temujin's mother, Holun, kept her children alive through determination and resourcefulness. They lived on wild plants, fish, small game. Temujin killed his half-brother in a dispute over food, an act that showed both his ruthlessness and his will to survive. As he grew, Temujin began to gather followers. He had charisma, intelligence, and something more, a vision. He saw the potential in uniting the fractious Mongol tribes into a single people. No longer would clans fight endlessly among themselves, wasting strength on petty feuds. United, they could be powerful beyond anything the steppe had ever seen. His rise was slow and deliberate. He formed alliances with other leaders, including Togrul, Khan of the Karait tribe, who had been his father's friend. He married Borte, forming connections with her powerful family. When Borte was kidnapped by the Merkit tribe, Temujin rallied allies and launched a rescue, demonstrating both his loyalty to those he cared for and his military capability. One by one, through a combination of diplomacy, strategic marriages, and warfare, Temujin subdued rival tribes. The Tatars who had killed his father, the Naimans, the Merkits. Each victory brought more warriors under his banner. He reorganized Mongol society, breaking old tribal affiliations and creating new units based on merit and loyalty to him personally. In 1206, at a great assembly called a Kurultai, the Mongol chieftains proclaimed Temujin as Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler, or possibly oceanic ruler, the exact translation still debated by scholars. He was in his 40s, hardened by years of struggle, ready to transform the Mongol tribes from a collection of nomads into an empire. Genghis Khan was not just a warrior. He was an innovator. He created a decimal military system, organizing troops into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Commanders were chosen for ability, not bloodline. A shepherd could rise to command thousands if he proved himself capable. This meritocracy made the Mongol army extraordinarily effective. He established laws called the Yasa, which governed everything from theft to adultery to loyalty. The laws were strict but applied equally to all, even to Mongol nobility. This created a sense of fairness, of order, that bound the empire together. He promoted religious tolerance, believing that many paths could lead to the eternal sky, Tingri, whom the Mongols worshipped. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and shamanists could all practice their faiths within Mongol territory, a remarkable stance for the 13th century. And he was practical about trade. Genghis Khan recognized that controlling the Silk Road, the ancient trade routes connecting China to the Middle East and Europe, would bring immense wealth and influence. He sent merchants and diplomats to neighboring kingdoms, establishing relationships, learning about potential targets. One such diplomatic mission led directly to war. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the Khwarezmian Empire, which controlled much of Central Asia. The governor of the border city of Otrar suspected the merchants of being spies and executed them, confiscating their goods. Genghis sent envoys demanding justice and compensation. The Khwarezmian Shah had the envoys killed, an insult that could not be ignored in the world of steppe diplomacy. Genghis Khan's response was devastating. The Mongol army invaded Khwarezm in 1219, destroying cities, slaughtering populations, and effectively erasing the empire from existence. This campaign demonstrated to the world that the Mongols were no longer just steppe raiders. They were a force capable of toppling the greatest kingdoms. But China, wealthy and populous China, remained the ultimate prize. The Jin dynasty controlled northern China at the time. They were themselves descendants of the Jurchen, northern people who had conquered northern China from the previous Song dynasty. The Jin had built walls of their own, trying to keep out nomadic tribes including the Mongols. They considered the Mongols barbarians, useful only as occasional mercenaries or trade partners. This attitude would prove fatal. In 1211, Genghis Khan turned his attention fully toward the Jin. His strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. He avoided the heavily fortified sections of the Great Wall where possible. When he encountered major fortresses, he often bypassed them entirely, riding around through less defended areas or through passes his scouts had identified. At the Battle of Yehuling in 1211, Mongol forces circumvented a substantial fortress at Zhangjiago and caught a Jin army in the open field. The Mongols were supreme in open-ground warfare. Their mounted archers could ride in circles around slower infantry, raining arrows from a distance, never engaging in close combat unless they had overwhelming advantage. The Jin army was destroyed. When Mongols did attack fortified positions, they adapted quickly. They had little experience with siege warfare initially. The steppe had no cities, no walls to practice against. But the Mongols learned. They captured Chinese and Persian engineers and forced them to build siege equipment. They employed catapults, trebuchets, and siege towers. They diverted rivers to flood cities or cut off water supplies. They used psychological warfare, offering generous terms to cities that surrendered quickly and utterly destroying cities that resisted, ensuring that word of Mongol ruthlessness spread faster than their armies. At Jiong Pass, one of the most heavily defended sections of the Great Wall, the Mongol general Jib employed deception. He pretended to retreat, luring the defenders out of the pass to pursue what they thought was a defeated enemy. When the gates were opened and the defenders scattered in pursuit, Jib's forces turned and charged back through the open gates. The fortress fell without a prolonged siege. This highlights a crucial point. The Great Wall, however impressive, was only as effective as the soldiers defending it. If troops were poorly led, corrupt, or demoralized, the wall became merely stone. If commanders made mistakes, opened gates at the wrong time, or fell for tricks, the wall could not save them. Internal divisions within Chinese dynasties often mattered more than external walls. Many Khitan defenders, remnants of a people who had themselves once ruled northern China before being conquered by the Jin, preferred to surrender to the Mongols rather than fight for their Jin overlords. The Mongols exploited these resentments, accepting defectors, incorporating them into their armies, using their knowledge of Chinese military practices against other Chinese forces. By 1215, the Mongols captured Zhongdu, the Jin capital, which would later become Beijing. The Jin dynasty was fatally weakened, though it would limp along for another 2 decades before finally being extinguished in 1234. But this was only northern China. The Song dynasty still ruled the south, wealthier and more cultured than the north, protected not just by walls but by rivers and mountains, by terrain the Mongol cavalry found difficult. The complete conquest of China would take another 45 years and would be completed not by Genghis Khan, who died in 1227, but by his grandson Kublai Khan. Let us pause in this narrative and breathe deeply. The story we are telling is long, spanning decades, involving millions of people, vast distances. But we are not in a hurry. History already happened. We are simply walking through it, observing, understanding. Imagine, if you will, the perspective of an ordinary person living during these times. You are a farmer in northern China, working fields that your family has worked for generations. You grow millet, wheat, rice if the land is right. You pay taxes to the Jin dynasty's officials, who come regularly to collect grain. You have heard stories of northern barbarians, Mongols, but they seem distant, unreal, problems for soldiers and emperors, not for farmers. Then one day refugees appear on the road. They come from villages to the north, carrying what they could grab, their faces marked by fear and exhaustion. They speak of horsemen, thousands of them, moving faster than anyone thought possible. They burned villages, they say. Took food, horses, anything useful. Killed those who resisted. The army sent to stop them was destroyed. You have a choice to make. Do you stay on your land, hoping the Mongols will pass by or that the imperial army will protect you? Or do you flee south, abandoning your home, your fields, everything you know? Many stayed. Many fled. Both groups faced terrible uncertainty. This was the human reality beneath the grand movements of armies and the strategies of Khans. Ordinary lives disrupted, ended, transformed by decisions made by distant rulers. The Great Wall, whatever its purpose, could not protect everyone, could not be everywhere at once. And it certainly could not prevent civil strife, corruption, or the internal weaknesses that often doom empires more effectively than any external enemy. Now let us move forward in time to the reign of Kublai Khan, and see how the conquest of China finally concluded. Kublai Khan was different from his grandfather in important ways. Born around 1215, he spent his youth learning not just the ways of the steppe but also Chinese culture, language, and philosophy. His mother, Sorgatani Beki, was unusually educated and politically astute. She ensured her sons received diverse educations, believing they would one day rule over diverse peoples. When Kublai became Great Khan in 1260, after a power struggle with his younger brother Erik Bok, he faced a choice. He could remain a steppe nomad, ruling from Mongolia as his grandfather had. Or he could become a Chinese emperor, ruling from China in the Chinese style. He chose the latter, understanding that to truly control China, he needed to appear legitimate to the Chinese people. In 1271 he proclaimed his dynasty the Yuan dynasty, using a Chinese name rather than a Mongol one. He moved his capital from Karakoram in Mongolia to Dadu, which became Beijing. He adopted Chinese court ceremonies, wore Chinese robes on state occasions, and consulted Chinese advisors. Yet he remained Mongol in crucial ways. He maintained Mongol traditions, continued to practice traditional Mongol religion alongside Buddhism, and kept his military organized along Mongol lines. He created a social hierarchy that placed Mongols at the top, followed by other Central Asian peoples, then Northern Chinese and finally Southern Chinese at the bottom. This discrimination created resentment that would eventually contribute to the Yuan dynasty's downfall, but in the short term, it ensured Mongol control. Kublai turned his full attention to conquering the Song dynasty in southern China. This proved far more difficult than the conquest of the Jin. The Song had natural barriers. The Yangtze River, the world's third longest river, formed a natural moat. Mountains rose in the south and west. The climate was wetter, hotter, more humid, conditions that horses from the dry steppe found difficult. Disease, unfamiliar to Mongol soldiers from the north, struck down men and used to southern China's illnesses. Most importantly, the Song had developed sophisticated military technology. They used gunpowder weapons, bombs, fire lances, early forms of cannons. They had strong navies, and Mongols, being steppe people, had no naval tradition. Fighting on water was entirely alien to them. The campaign was long and grinding. Mongol forces, now including many Chinese auxiliaries and siege engineers, attacked on multiple fronts. They moved through Sichuan province in the west, attempting to outflank Song defenses. They besieged key cities along the rivers, trying to control water routes. The siege of Xiangyang, a crucial fortress city on the Han River, became emblematic of this long struggle. Xiangyang controlled access to the Yangtze River Valley and had to be taken before the Mongols could advance into the Song heartland. The siege began in 1268 and lasted 5 years. 5 years of encirclement, assault, negotiation, and persistence. The Mongols brought in Muslim engineers from Persia who built massive counterweight trebuchets, capable of hurling stones weighing hundreds of pounds. These weapons battered Xiangyang's walls day after day. The city's commander held out, hoping for relief from the Song court, but that relief never came in sufficient strength. In 1273, the commander negotiated a surrender, obtaining promises from Kublai Khan that the population would be spared. Kublai, who had learned statecraft and the value of mercy as well as terror, agreed. The city's population survived, and its commander even joined the Mongol administration, bringing his knowledge of Song defenses with him. With Xiangyang fallen, the Yangtze River Valley lay open. Mongol forces moved rapidly, attacking city after city. Some surrendered. Some resisted and were destroyed. The Song court, weakened by decades of pressure, by internal corruption, and by a population tired of war, began to crumble. In 1276, Mongol troops entered Linnan, the Song capital, modern-day Hangzhou. The Dowager Empress and the Child Emperor surrendered. The Song dynasty was effectively finished, though loyalist resistance continued for another 3 years. The final end came at the Battle of Yamen in 1279, a naval engagement in the Pearl River Delta near modern-day Hong Kong. Song loyalists, with the remnants of their fleet, made a last stand. The Mongols, having learned naval warfare from defectors and captured Chinese sailors, attacked with a combined fleet of their own ships and captured Song vessels. The Song fleet was destroyed. Lu Xiufu, a Song court official and loyal minister, seeing defeat was inevitable, took the 8-year-old Emperor Bing in his arms and jumped into the sea, drowning them both rather than allowing capture. Thousands of Song officials and their families followed, choosing death over submission. The sea, it was said, was thick with bodies. This tragic end marked the completion of Mongol conquest of China. For the first time in Chinese history, all of China was ruled by a foreign dynasty. The Yuan dynasty, the Mongol dynasty, now governed from the Gobi Desert to the South China Sea. And the Great Wall? During this conquest, it had stood as it always had. But it had not prevented the Mongols from entering China. It had slowed them, certainly. It had forced them to adapt their tactics. But ultimately, it had failed its primary purpose, keeping China safe from northern invasion. Let us consider this carefully without drama, just examining the facts. The Great Wall failed against the Mongols for several interconnected reasons, none of them simple. First, the wall was only as strong as the government that maintained it. The Jin dynasty, when Genghis Khan attacked, was already weakened by wars with the Song. Resources that might have gone to wall maintenance and garrison support instead funded military campaigns elsewhere. Soldiers stationed on the wall were sometimes not paid, leading to corruption, desertion, and low morale. Second, the Mongols were extraordinarily adaptable. They came from a culture that valued flexibility and pragmatism. When they encountered walls, they did not simply charge at them. They studied them, probed for weaknesses, waited for opportunities, and when necessary, simply went around them. The Great Wall was thousands of kilometers long, but it was not continuous everywhere. There were gaps, less defensible sections, places where maintenance had lapsed. Mongol scouts, riding far ahead of the main army, would find these weak points and report back. The main force would then concentrate at vulnerable areas. Third, the Mongols exploited internal divisions within Chinese society. They accepted defectors, especially from non-Han ethnic groups who bore grudges against their rulers. Khitan soldiers, for instance, often surrendered to Mongols rather than fight for the Jin dynasty that had conquered their people generations earlier. These defectors provided crucial intelligence about wall defenses, garrison strengths, and supply routes. Fourth, siege warfare could overcome even the strongest fortifications given enough time and willingness to pay the cost. The Mongols learned siege techniques from the peoples they conquered. Chinese engineers, Persian engineers, anyone with useful knowledge was incorporated into the Mongol military machine. When necessary, the Mongols would besiege a fortified position for months or years, starving it out, bombarding it, mining under walls, or simply waiting for disease and despair to do their work. Fifth, the sheer scale of Mongol operations often overwhelmed defensive capabilities. While the Great Wall might stop small raiding parties, when the entire Mongol army, numbering in the tens or hundreds of thousands, descended on a region local garrisons could not hold. The wall was meant to delay invasions long enough for the main imperial army to respond, but if that army was defeated in the field, as happened at Yihuling and elsewhere, then the wall became just an obstacle to be bypassed or breached at leisure. But here is perhaps the most important point. The Mongols did not simply conquer China through military force. They did it through persistence, through willingness to adapt, through exploitation of political weakness, and through offering pragmatic deals to those willing to submit. Kublai Khan, in particular, understood that ruling China required more than conquest. It required legitimacy. He built a capital in Chinese style. He performed Chinese imperial rituals. He employed Chinese bureaucrats. He supported Chinese arts and culture, even while maintaining Mongol supremacy in political and military matters. Many Chinese, exhausted by decades of war, chose to accept Mongol rule rather than continue fighting. The wall could not prevent that choice. So when we ask, did the Great Wall fail? We must answer with nuance. It failed to prevent the Mongol conquest, yes, but it succeeded in other ways. It protected China for centuries against smaller raids. It facilitated trade and taxation. It projected imperial power. It created a symbol that even today represents Chinese civilization. Walls are not magic. They are tools. Their effectiveness depends on countless factors. The strength of the state that built them, the skill and morale of defenders, the capabilities of attackers, geographic conditions, political circumstances, and simple chance. The Great Wall did not fail because it was poorly designed or weakly built. It failed because it faced an enemy unlike any China had encountered before, and because internal weaknesses within Chinese dynasties gave that enemy opportunities. Now let us imagine something different. Let us enter the realm of thoughtful speculation. What if the Great Wall had not existed? What if Chinese emperors had never built those thousands of kilometers of fortifications? What would the world look like? This is not a question with a certain answer. History does not offer such certainties. But we can imagine gently based on what we know about how the presence of the wall shaped events. Without the Great Wall, raids from northern nomads would have been more frequent and penetrated deeper into Chinese territory. The Xiongnu, the Rouran, the Turks, the Khitans, all the nomadic peoples who pressed against China's frontiers would have had easier access to agricultural Chinese lands. Small groups of horsemen could have ridden south, taken what they needed, and returned to the grasslands before Chinese armies could respond. This might have led to several outcomes. Chinese dynasties might have developed different defensive strategies. Perhaps larger mobile cavalry forces, like those developed by later dynasties, would have emerged earlier. Perhaps Chinese civilization would have expanded less toward the north and more toward the south and west, seeking security in mountains and rivers rather than in artificial barriers. Cultural exchange between nomadic and sedentary peoples might have increased. Without a clear physical boundary, the mixing of cultures, languages, and practices might have happened more gradually, more organically. Trade might have flowed more freely in both directions. Chinese goods moving north, northern horses and furs moving south, with fewer choke points where officials could tax and restrict. But here is a more interesting speculation. Without the Great Wall to serve as a clear boundary, a symbol of separation between civilized China and barbaric nomads, would that psychological division have been as strong? Walls create not just physical barriers but mental ones. They say, "This is us. That is them." Without the wall, might Chinese and nomadic cultures have seen themselves as part of a continuum rather than as opposites? Now, specifically regarding the Mongols, would the absence of the Great Wall have made their conquest easier or harder? Easier in one sense. Without fortifications to slow them, without garrison forces stationed along a defensive line, Mongol cavalry could have penetrated Chinese territory more quickly. The initial invasions might have been more devastating, reaching deeper into China before resistance could organize. But harder in another sense. The Great Wall, paradoxically, may have created a false sense of security that weakened China's overall military preparedness. Resources poured into wall maintenance and garrison support might instead have gone into developing mobile field armies better suited to fighting the Mongols. If Chinese military culture had been forced to focus on cavalry warfare and rapid response, rather than static defense, the Mongols might have faced more competent opposition. Additionally, the political symbolism of the wall's failure was significant. When Mongol forces breached or bypassed the Great Wall, it was not just a military defeat but a psychological one. The Great Barrier that was supposed to protect China had failed. This may have accelerated the collapse of dynasties like the Jin and Song, as people lost faith in their government's ability to protect them. Without the wall, without that symbolic failure, Chinese resistance might have been more sustained, more decentralized. Local lords and generals might have continued fighting longer, making the conquest more difficult and prolonged than it already was. But let us go further in our speculation. Let us imagine that without the Great Wall, the Mongols had conquered China even more quickly and completely. What might that have meant for global history? A faster Mongol conquest of China might have allowed the Mongols to consolidate their empire more effectively. Resources that went into decades of campaigning against the Song dynasty could have been directed elsewhere, perhaps westward into Europe, southward into Southeast Asia, or into better administering the vast territories already under Mongol control. The Pax Mongolica, the period of relative peace and stability under Mongol rule, might have begun earlier and lasted longer. This was the era when the Silk Road was safest, when merchants could travel from Venice to Beijing under the protection of Mongol law. Marco Polo's famous journey was possible because of this peace. Earlier and stronger Pax Mongolica might have accelerated the exchange of technologies between East and West. Chinese innovations like gunpowder, printing, and the compass reached Europe during and after the Mongol period. More intensive exchange might have spread these technologies faster. European Renaissance, which benefited from Eastern knowledge brought back by travelers and traders, might have begun earlier or progressed differently. Disease patterns might have changed as well. The Black Death, which killed perhaps a third of Europe's population in the 14th century, likely traveled along Mongol trade routes from Asia to the West. More open borders, faster movement of goods and people, might have spread the plague differently earlier or later with unpredictable consequences for global population. Culturally, a world with easier movement between East and West might have developed different religious and philosophical landscapes. Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and traditional Chinese philosophies all coexisted within the Mongol Empire, each influencing the others. Greater exchange might have led to more religious syncretism, or perhaps to more conflict as different worldviews confronted each other more directly. The very concept of China as a distinct, walled-off civilization might have evolved differently. Chinese identity has long been partly defined in opposition to northern nomads, the barbarians beyond the wall. Without the wall as a physical and symbolic marker, would Chinese culture have developed the same sense of distinctness? Or would it have seen itself more as part of a larger Asian continuum, sharing more openly with neighbors? These are vast speculations, touching on centuries of history and billions of lives. We cannot know what would have truly happened. History does not offer parallel universes for comparison. But in imagining these possibilities, we see more clearly how the Great Wall was not just a pile of stones but a force that shaped politics, culture, psychology, and the very way people understood their place in the world. Now, let us drift away from speculation and return to what actually happened, moving forward from the Mongol conquest to its aftermath. The Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan, ruled China from 1271 to 1368. Nearly a century of Mongol rule over the world's most populous civilization. What was this period like? For Mongol elites, it was a time of wealth and power. The Yuan court was magnificent, described in odd terms by foreign visitors like Marco Polo, who spent 17 years in Kublai Khan's service. The capital, Dadu, was a planned city with wide streets, grand palaces, and a multicultural population. Mongol nobles lived in luxury, supported by taxes from millions of Chinese farmers and merchants. Kublai Khan patronized the arts. He supported painters, poets, and playwrights, both Mongol and Chinese. He built libraries and observatories. He commissioned maps and sponsored geographical expeditions. The Yuan period saw the development of new artistic styles that blended Mongol and Chinese traditions. Trade flourished. The Mongol Empire connected East and West more effectively than ever before. The Silk Road was safe under Mongol protection. Merchants from Persia, Central Asia, even Europe traveled to China. Marco Polo was only the most famous of many foreign visitors. Ideas, technologies, and goods flowed in all directions. Paper money, already used in China, spread under Mongol rule. The Yuan government issued standardized currency backed by silk and precious metals. This facilitated trade across the vast empire. Kublai even attempted to introduce paper money in Persia, though this experiment failed due to lack of trust and different economic conditions. But for ordinary Chinese people, especially Han Chinese, the Yuan period was difficult. The social hierarchy placed them at the bottom. Mongols held the highest positions in government and military. Central Asians, called Simu people, served as administrators, tax collectors, and merchants, trusted by the Mongols more than Chinese. Northern Chinese had somewhat better status than Southern Chinese, as they had been conquered earlier and were seen as more compliant. This discrimination bred resentment. Chinese scholars, traditionally the ruling class, found themselves excluded from power. The civil service examination system, which for centuries had allowed talented individuals to rise in government regardless of birth, was either suspended or limited. This cut off the primary path to power and prestige for educated Chinese. Heavy taxation burdened peasants. The Mongols maintained a large military, supported a lavish court, and undertook expensive projects like the construction of the Grand Canal's northern extension, which improved transportation but cost immense resources and labor. Mongol and Central Asian tax collectors were often corrupt, extracting more than required and pocketing the difference. Natural disasters compounded these problems. The Yellow River flooded multiple times during the Yuan period, most catastrophically in the 1340s and 1350s. These floods displaced millions, destroyed farmland, and led to famine. The government's response was inadequate. Resources went to maintaining Mongol power rather than to disaster relief. Rebellions began to break out. Secret societies, especially those connected to Buddhism and folk religions, organized resistance. The White Lotus Society, the Red Turban Rebellion, these movements drew support from dispossessed peasants, unemployed workers, and nationalist-minded Chinese who resented foreign rule. The Yuan government, weakened by succession disputes among Mongol princes, struggled to respond effectively. Different factions within the Mongol nobility fought each other for control, diverting attention and resources from governance. The empire that Kublai Khan had built with such effort began to fracture. In 1368, a former peasant and Buddhist monk named Zhu Yuanzhang led a successful rebellion that drove the Mongols out of China. He established the Ming Dynasty, returning Chinese rule to China. The Yuan court fled north, back to Mongolia, where Mongol Khans continued to rule over the steppes but never again controlled China. The Ming dynasty's first priority was defense. They had experienced Mongol conquest. They knew the danger from the north, and so they rebuilt the Great Wall. The Ming approach to the Great Wall was different from previous dynasties. Where earlier walls had been primarily earth and wood, the Ming built with brick and stone. Where earlier walls had been discontinuous, the Ming connected and extended sections into a more unified system. The wall we see today, the wall that tourists walk on, the wall in photographs and documentaries, is primarily the Ming Wall. Construction began in the late 14th century and continued for nearly 300 years. The Ming employed millions of workers over this period. Soldiers, peasants, prisoners, anyone who could carry stone and mortar. The work was hard, dangerous, and never-ending. Sections built earlier needed constant maintenance and repair. The Ming Wall stretched over 8,000 kilometers, though not all sections were equally fortified. The most heavily defended areas were near Beijing and other strategic locations. Here the wall was tallest, widest, with the most watchtowers and garrison troops. Other sections in more remote areas were simpler, sometimes just earthworks rather than brick-faced constructions. But even this massive effort could not guarantee security. The Mongols, though no longer unified under a single empire, remained dangerous. They conducted frequent raids into Chinese territory throughout the Ming period. Sometimes they succeeded, breaching the wall, plundering towns, and escaping back to the steppes before Ming armies could respond. The wall's effectiveness depended on factors beyond its construction. Good leadership, adequate funding, well-trained soldiers, efficient communication, these were as important as stone and mortar. When the Ming government was strong and competent, the wall worked reasonably well. When the government weakened, became corrupt, or faced internal rebellions, the wall's effectiveness declined. The ultimate irony of the Great Wall came in 1644. The Ming Dynasty, weakened by peasant rebellions, economic crisis, and government dysfunction, was falling apart. Li Zicheng, a rebel leader, captured Beijing. The last Ming emperor hanged himself on a hill behind the Forbidden City. In desperation, Ming General Wu Sangui, stationed at Shanhai Pass, one of the most important gates in the Great Wall, made a fateful decision. He invited the Manchus, a people from beyond the wall who had been building their own power in Manchuria, to help suppress the rebels. The Manchus agreed. Wu Sangui opened the gates. The Manchu army marched through the Great Wall, defeated the rebels, and then simply never left. They established their own dynasty, the Qin, which would rule China until 1912. Once again, the Great Wall had failed to protect China from northern conquest. But this time, it was betrayed from within, opened by a Chinese general who chose foreign alliance over rebel victory. The Great Wall, built to keep northern peoples out, was opened willingly by those it was meant to protect. This encapsulates the complexity of walls, of defense, of history itself. Walls are only as strong as the people who defend them. And people are complicated, driven by fear, ambition, desperation, hope. As we near the end of our journey tonight, let us return one more time to that image of the wall at peace. It is evening now. The sun sets behind western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The stones of the wall, which held the day's heat, now release it slowly into the cooling air. Guards change shifts. The night watch begins. One soldier stands at his post, looking north as thousands of soldiers have looked north from this wall for 2,000 years. He does not know that in a few centuries, the wall will no longer serve its original purpose. He does not know that it will become a symbol, a tourist destination, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. He knows only his duty: watch, wait, signal if danger comes. The grasslands beyond are quiet. Somewhere out there, perhaps Mongol herders tend their animals, moving with the seasons as they always have. The wind carries no threat tonight, only the smell of grass and dust. This soldier, whose name history will not record, is part of something larger than himself. He stands on stones laid by workers who died before he was born. He defends people he will never meet. He serves an empire that may outlast him or may fall tomorrow. He does not know. He simply stands watch. This is what the Great Wall really was. Countless ordinary moments, countless ordinary people doing their duty quietly. Battles were rare. Invasions were occasional. But the watching, the standing guard, the waiting, this happened every day, every night for centuries. The wall did not stop history. Nothing can. History is the movement of peoples, cultures, ideas, ambitions. It flows like water, finding paths around obstacles, wearing down barriers, sometimes slowly, sometimes in sudden floods. The Great Wall shaped how history flowed. It channeled it, diverted it, slowed it. But it could not stop it. The Mongols came. They conquered. They ruled for a time. Then they left, driven out by new forces, new movements of history. And the wall remained, silent witness to rise and fall, conquest and reconquest, the eternal cycle of empires. What can we learn from this? Perhaps that walls, whether physical or metaphorical, are never permanent solutions. They buy time. They create space for other solutions to develop. But ultimately, walls are static and history is motion. Something that moves will always, eventually, find a way around what stands still. Perhaps we learn that the most important defenses are not physical but social and political. A united people, a just government, a functioning society, these are stronger than any wall. Divisions within are more dangerous than enemies without. The Great Wall could not save dynasties that had lost the trust and support of their people. Perhaps we learned that even failures have value. The Great Wall failed to prevent Mongol conquest, yet it succeeded in countless other ways. It protected trade. It facilitated communication. It employed millions. It became a symbol of endurance, of human ambition, of the desire to build something that outlasts its builders. Or perhaps we learn simply to appreciate the complexity of history, to resist simple narratives of success and failure, heroes and villains. The Mongols were not simply destroyers. They were builders too, connecting east and west, patronizing arts, enabling trade. Chinese dynasties were not simply victims. They were also conquerors, expanding southward and westward, subjugating other peoples. The Great Wall was not simply a defensive structure. It was also a tool of empire, of control, of separating peoples. History is nuanced, complicated, full of contradictions. And that is what makes it endlessly fascinating, worth studying, worth understanding. The night deepens. Stars appear, the same stars that guided Mongol horsemen across the steppes, that Chinese astronomers observed from their towers, that travelers along the Silk Road used to navigate. The wall stretches on, kilometer after kilometer, climbing mountains, descending into valleys, a ribbon of stone across the landscape. Tomorrow the sun will rise again. Tourists will walk sections of the wall near Beijing, taking photographs, marveling at the engineering. Archaeologists will study less visited sections, learning new details about construction techniques and historical events. The wall endures, though its purpose has changed utterly. But tonight, in this quiet moment, we can imagine it as it was. Not a tourist attraction but a living, functioning system. Guards in their towers. Signal fires ready to light. The northern frontier, always watched, always guarded, never entirely safe, never entirely dangerous. This is the Great Wall. Not a single thing but a process, an ongoing effort across centuries involving millions of lives. Success and failure, triumph and tragedy, all mixed together inseparably. It is too large, too complex, too human to be reduced to simple judgments. And the Mongols, not simply conquerors but a people adapting to their world, using mobility as their strength, creating the largest contiguous empire in human history before dissolving back into the steppes, leaving behind stories, genes, cultural influences that persist to this day. Their meeting, the collision of Chinese civilization and Mongol empire, reshaped Asia and, through trade routes and cultural exchange, influenced the entire world. The Great Wall was part of that story, a chapter in the long, complicated relationship between settled peoples and nomadic peoples, between those who build walls and those who ride past them. We have walked together tonight from ancient times through medieval conquest to the present day. We have seen walls built and breached, empires rise and fall, peoples clash and blend. We have imagined what might have been while understanding what was. History offers no certain lessons, no guaranteed wisdom. But it offers something perhaps more valuable: perspective. The problems we face today, the divisions between peoples, the questions about borders and identity and security, these are not new. Humans have grappled with them for thousands of years. The Great Wall and the Mongol invasions are just one example of this eternal grappling. And now, as our journey ends, let yourself settle more deeply into rest. The stories have been told. The history has unfolded. Questions remain as they always do, but they can wait for another day. Tonight is for letting go, for allowing the mind to drift, for finding peace in the knowledge that history, however tumultuous, eventually settles into stillness. The wall stands. The steps stretch endlessly. The stars shine above both. And you, listening to these words, can release them now, can let them fade like smoke from an ancient signal fire, like hoof prints on the grassland, like footsteps on stone stairs worn smooth by countless feet. Rest now. Let history become dream. Let the Great Wall and the Mongol horsemen ride together into the soft darkness of sleep. And if you found peace in this journey, if these stories helped you find calm, Remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue bringing you these quiet explorations of history's great questions. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining this journey. Sleep well.